Hey there, Chris. Welcome back to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I feel like you probably in a way, I don't know, Kyle, he's got to be a contender for like a lot of like guests because we had you back on a while ago. We
hmm
were on your podcast a couple times, and I think we released some of those over here on our podcast, but people have heard your voice here probably just as much as any of our guests. So I want to welcome you back here specifically today. How are things are going? How things are going.
Hey, well, thanks for having me back. Yeah, we've had a good relationship back and forth between our podcasts and stuff. Love having you, and by the time this comes out, your hot seat debate will be released
Ooh.
over the summer,
Oh,
so
right.
that'll
I
be
forgot
good
about
too.
that.
I almost forgot about that, but definitely something to check out. We'll be sharing it on social media for all those math moment makers out there when we're going to go back to your podcast and have some fun over there. You know what, Chris? We've asked you math moments back in the past. You've been a part of our summit, and you're coming to be a part of the summit again here in 2024. So I think for a lot of people in the audience, they probably know a little bit about Chris Luzniak here, but and debate math. But I think what we want to dig into here is maybe a little bit of some of maybe the differences,
Ooh,
that you've
the
seen.
secrets,
We were just
the
chatting before
dirt.
we hit record, and I think people would be curious to know. It's like we are always growing, always learning, right? And sometimes even it's not necessarily a belief shift, but it's just when you observe different behaviors of students, like when I do things a certain way, you get different results, and over time you start to refine how you're doing things. I'm curious, what have you learned, over these past few years that maybe you wish you knew 5 years
Ooh.
ago, maybe it was
Oh,
10 years ago, as you began this journey of debate math?
Well, yeah, I mean the my book and all this stuff started, almost 10 years ago
oh my
now, with some of
gosh.
the things I've done, and some of the early stuff I have is like 15 years old or so. And so, like I was saying before, this is like pre-pandemic and like learning how to teach online, all the things happening modern with AI. Like the world has changed so much. And I just, I've had a good 5, 10 years to just explore other things. Like I
Mm,
love debate, and I've been thinking a lot about how debate engages students. Yes, and I still talk about that and work with teachers on that. And like my role now, I've left the classroom after almost 20 years of teaching high school and middle school math, to work with teachers all around the world around debate math. But I've also, because I've gone down these rabbit holes of like what debate does and how the brain makes arguments,
mm,
I've started to
right.
think a lot about how debate can help adults. I've worked with some math coaches and some like teams of teachers, and like how we can use debate to disagree about things. And even leaving the math education world and working with adults in the world of like politics and business, and what does it mean for your team
Hmm.
to disagree in a good way. And
Right.
I've learned a lot about, I think debate is actually the key to helping people get along better, even though that sounds kind of counterintuitive. Like,
Mm.
but if we actually learn to have good arguments, it can make a big difference. And so I work with students and think about that as well with students, but now I've grown to like thinking about adults and all these
Right.
other places. So my mind is all over the place when it comes to debate.
Right. Right. That's super true for sure. And I think focusing on you're right, focusing on how you can disagree peacefully is almost like I think I just heard this. Like this is why I think I use the word peacefully, and I'm gonna butcher where I heard it, but it was on a podcast lately. But it was like they were talking about it wasn't specifically debate, but it was about how to it was Simon Sinek. You guys know who Simon Sinek is,
Mhm.
but it was like he was talking
Yes.
about how to specifically talk to other people so that it was in a peaceful way. And he was like, that's the secret to world peace. Is like is like if we can so what I just heard Chris say is that if you all learned how to use debate in math class, we will have world peace.
I mean,
but
wouldn't that
but
be powerful if
I
your math students could
I
learn
know
debate skills plus
totally.
math content?
It was like because it was like if you can figure out how to get along and disagree peacefully, then it fixes so many things. And I
Mm.
think like that's so important of like the work that you've been doing. So I know that also you've been like you've been out of the classroom, you're bouncing around and doing different sessions with different teachers. You're hearing how teachers are using this resource or trying to implement. What would you say is the one of the most asked questions that you get when you're, say, at a live session from a group of teachers and they're trying to implement some of the things you've talked about in your book, or in some of your workshops and your sessions, or or maybe they're just trying to kind of do something in the classroom. But what's coming up all the time that you're consistently answering or helping teachers with?
I think the biggest thing for teachers is like, how do I start? And then kind of
Right.
overcoming that initial resistance. I get that a lot. And I'm sure like you guys experience it well working with teachers, like just anything new for teachers can often feel daunting, or like, what does that look like? When
Totally.
you say the words debate, people think of yelling and
Right.
screaming, right? Like this aggressive thing, and that's not what I mean. Like there's a world of competitive debate that's cool, and that's a thing that I did in high school. But I think of debate now, like Rob and I on our podcast talk about all the time. I think of debate as a structured conversation where everyone has a voice, and
Right.
so framing it that way really like helps give people some point of view. And so like in my work, because of this, I've been doing a lot of learning labs with teachers, and like just being working with them in their classroom to like create some debatable moments, and then launch it and just see what happens, because get that feedback of like, well, this worked for your kids because you were in California and whatever, right?
Right.
That you
Hmm.
were with high school, whatever. And so I jump in their classroom and say like, hey, let's create a lesson. Let's do this tomorrow and see what happens. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me. I love being back in the classroom for any moments that I can. But then teachers see their students come alive because we're asking them questions that really just engage the brain. They can't help
Hmm.
wanting to say something about their opinions and use math vocab at the same time, which is a win for the teacher, right? And talk about methods and conceptual understanding and all those things. And so jumping in the classroom is really my favorite thing to do now. And that's my answer to that frustration.
Yeah, I could definitely see how it would be a challenge of anything new, whether you're a teacher or in any area of life. Anything new is a little bit scary. It's a little daunting. Now you also have an audience in a classroom, right? Now you have students as well, but you also have these other things on your mind too. You have like parents. You're like, how do I maybe address the content? How do I ensure that I'm quote unquote covering that content? And when we think about it though, and you think about that skill that you're allowing students and empowering students to develop, and you think about the 5 mathematical proficiencies, like the piece around adaptive reasoning is so key to me here. And it's an area that I think we haven't done well historically in mathematics and math education anyway. And I feel that by giving students this opportunity, and when we say opportunity, it's like sometimes it's a hidden opportunity, because I'm sure sometimes students don't enjoy the idea of this at first, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, like I'm curious for you. Like I can only imagine as a teacher who I used to be a very procedural teacher, there isn't a back and forth, or there wasn't a back and forth. I can only imagine that's another barrier for teachers to sort of overcome. So, like, what does that look like and sound like? Do you have any maybe starter routines, or is there something that you feel has been working better more recently that you've landed on, that you've been sharing in these learning labs that might be helpful to some of those listening? And hey, if you want to give them a sneak peek into the summit session, feel free to open the door a crack to encourage some folks to attend.
Yeah, I would say so. First of all, when I do these learning labs in teachers' classrooms, like we acknowledge that it may not go well. We have a goal of student discourse and debate happening, but it may not go well. So everything is a trial and error, and
Mhm.
I like embrace the growth mindset and all those things with that. So we go in that, and if it doesn't go well, then we will just have a good conversation afterwards in our reflection time, right? Of like what would have made it go better. But if it does go well, which often it really goes well, that we have a good discussion afterwards anyway, though, about like what parts make it go well. And so we talk about things like what you're asking about giving students very clear directions, like sentence stems, and like, does it mean you're talking to one person, the whole room? What is your eye contact? What is your body language? Like, what is that supposed to look like? And then with all those clear directions, like what it means. Again, we're not getting up and yelling at each other. It's not like that kind of argument, right? Or what it means to give a formal argument in debate in math class looks different. So being very clear about that, and then making sure that the questions are actually ones that I want to, or students want to debate and talk about. Like, there's often times where we come up with a question we think is going to be great and we throw it out there and it is just like crickets, like, oh, that wasn't a good one. And I tell teachers all the time, like, don't be afraid just to skip it and be like, okay, we got one person to
Right.
speak up.
Yeah.
They're really okay, you're right. There's not much, I don't know, we're
Yeah.
we're debating cats versus dogs and no one really cares today about that one. Okay,
Yeah.
let's dive into, maybe I'll have a backup question ready or something, but
Right.
like just laugh at it and have fun with it and know that like there is no formula for the perfect conversation, right? Even just among
Right.
adults in life, like there's no way we can like script out a conversation. You have to just be willing to kind of roll with it,
Yeah.
and laugh it off if it doesn't go well, and just reflect on why it doesn't. Like, is
Right.
your end of the day class, after lunch, exhausted every time they come to see you? And like, do you do something different, something more physical to get them awake and pay attention? Or is it just the group of kids that, they don't feel like they're good at math, or they are
Right.
missing some vocab or something? What is it? So there's so
Mhm.
many variables to consider.
Yeah. And I think, thinking about that, when you said laugh it off or skip it or change it on the fly, I think it's still like, and this is something I always try to put myself in teachers' shoes who are either not confident, in front of kids yet on a regular basis, or maybe that math intimidates themselves still. And it's kind of like, I it's one of those curse of knowledges, or curse of knowledge things. I think for us is that us laughing it off or saying let's just modify on the fly, like let's go off script, is
Mm,
like just so easy for us because of the experiences we've had, the confidence in the subject matter, probably the confidence we've built up, teaching, we taught teenagers. I think you taught,
yeah,
teenagers, and it's like just having that confidence in the classroom is huge for being able to kind of like go off script. And I keep thinking about those teachers who are like, I need the script. It's like everything, I'm clinging. You can see them like shaking with it, right? It's like I need to read it word for word, or like how do I not, how do I go off script? Like how do I make sure I'm confident enough to go off script? And I think that's still a struggle for a lot of teachers to kind of go, where do I go from here? And I feel like there's like I think that's still a barrier for so many teachers, kind of like trying something new, right? It's kind of like if I
yeah,
try something new, where could that go? And am I ready for that? Oh my gosh, I'm not sure I am ready. I'm ready for that. And I think that's just I don't know. I always try to think about what would I tell those teachers, if I'm trying to get them to try something new. I'd be curious to hear what you say. Maybe it's the same thing I would say, but I'm all ears, because I don't think any of us have the exact right answer.
There's no
I
quick answer
know,
to
I
that,
know,
but
I know.
I'll say, like, there's a group of teachers that I've been working with this year, and something I noticed is, like, in some of the lessons we were creating, they weren't super clear on what their objective was. Like today we're going to learn about slope, but like, what is, there's so much about slope, like how to write it, what part of the equation it's in, what does it mean to be increasing or decreasing, rise over run, the formula, like where do you want to go? And sometimes it could take hours to kind of like make a lesson if you are that vague and you keep like
Right.
throwing, like, just, you can Google slope and find a million worksheets and Desmos activities and other things, right? There's so much.
Totally.
So, but I think that relates to debate, in that, like, in debate, we have to have a resolution that we are debating. Like, and whenever on our podcast, when we have guests on ahead of time, we work with all of them to figure out the wording of this. Like, are we debating
Right.
cats are better than dogs, or are we debating cats are easier to raise than dogs? What is it? Like,
Right. I
let's
remember
work on
I
the
remember you
wording.
pushing us on that, and I think we were like, I don't
It
know, like,
doesn't matter. Yeah.
can't we just talk? And you're like, no,
Yeah.
we're gonna make sure that we have, like, what is it that we're actually saying, what one of us is on the side of, or not the side of.
Yeah, it's a key to a good debate. And I even goes back to, like, I have a theater background as well. I did theater in college, and I think about like all the improving you have to do as an actor on stage, but you have to know what your intention is as
Right.
a character, right? So same with teaching. Like, if you really, your goal really is, I want everyone today to be able to, tell me the difference between a positive and negative slope, like what that means. Like, if you have that clear goal, then you can go off in any direction, right? Like, I did a lesson with the angles with parallel lines and transversals, the alternate interior angles and same
Hmm.
side angles with
Hmm.
teachers. And about halfway through, I just went back to like the beginning of the lesson question and said, can we now like tie this back into like what we started off with and like point out some things and relationships here? And we never got the second half of the lesson, but like I could see that like bringing that back up just in the moment, you
Right.
know, there's no one way to do that, but it's something I made up and they were like, oh, that was so brilliant. And I was like, well, just a
Intentionality.
thing I thought about because all I wanted was for them to leave.
Totally.
I think it was like understanding the vocab of those words or the relationships of those
Mhm.
angles or something like that. So, you know, like I'm just going to come back to anything that will help me hit that point. And that's, I think, the biggest struggle for teachers is there's so much in our minds. We want to have group work strategy. We want to, you know, have discourse. We want students to be loving math and feel included and all the other things, which are also great. But then we sometimes forget why the point of today's lesson is like, what is our real
Right.
goal?
Yeah. And I think it's so easy for that to happen because there's so many things you could do. And it's like, well, I want to cover all of those things, but let's be realistic and like, what will we cover? Because if we aren't
Cool.
clear, then we'll probably not cover anything,
Yeah.
you know, like we'll kind of skim over everything and sort of see and hope that someone got something. So what I'm hearing from you is this, you know, theme of intentionality, right? So whether it's debate or whether it's just a math lesson in general, the reality is that we have to really know what is it that we really want them to know and understand and be able to do at the end of a lesson or at the end of a week or at the end of a unit. And the more intentional we can become, actually, I think this is also a nice gateway to actually better understanding the mathematics ourselves, because there's many times where, you know, there's a concept that we're supposed to teach. And if we don't really think deeply about it, you know, you might think it's just this, but in reality, it's like much bigger, or the opposite. You think it's really big, and then maybe you're focusing on everything, but in reality, everything's not that important at that point in the learning journey, right? So I love that move. And you sort of highlighted, you know, it's the same idea as when you're speaking. If you're speaking to a group and you're trying to get a point across, you need to be very clear on what that point is, because you don't want everybody leaving the talk going, he said a bunch of really interesting things, but like, what was the point of that? You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you look back, and I look back at
Well-
my own teaching career and think about how many times did kids walk away from my lesson thinking that, right? Like, okay, I think but why did we just do that? You know, like what's going on here? Why does that matter? And, you know, what am I going to do with this stuff? Right.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's like the other thing specifically to say what you said there, Kyle, is kind of like, it's kind of like saying like, if you know the intentionality, then there's a million pathways to get there. And it doesn't matter which one, you know, almost the time it doesn't matter which one I go down as long as I end there. So it's kind of like when I think about it, like, I remember talking to somebody, I think it was one of my daughters, who had to like get up in front of people and do a speech. And it was like, I said, like, look, what is it that the main point you're trying to make here? And like, because she thought she had to write it all out and then read it. And I was like, you know what? Like, people, like, you don't have to write it all out. That might help for you. But I mean, like, if you keep in mind what is the main point you're trying to make, or the main points you're trying to make, keep that in mind. And then that's all you have to really remember. And then if you believe it, then you'll get there. You know, you'll make the point in the moment. And then it's like, you don't have to say stress about like sticking to the script, because you know the point and you can figure out the ways to get there. Chris, before we hit record, we were chatting about like differences over the course of the years and how things have changed. And I'm curious about you know, you said you kind of started this almost like 10 years ago, which sounds crazy, but what is one thing, one thing in the book that you would change if you could?
Oh boy, you're asking me to remember what's in the book and what's not anymore. The world of the book, like what was in the book was, you know, most of what I had done at that point, but
Right.
over the years, like you all, like constantly toying and playing with new things,
Sure.
creating more stuff. So I don't even know what's exactly in the book anymore and what's come
You don't read it
afterwards.
like every week before, you know.
I don't study it. Test myself. No. But I just like things in there are great. Like it's a good starting point and it's where I started from. And
Sure.
then once I got comfortable, because I was a very traditional teacher, like I had my students in rows and I was doing most of the talking in class. And I thought, especially because I was in my 20s in my early teaching career, I thought I was going to be young and energetic and connect with the students.
Right.
And they're just going to
Right.
love math class and
Probably
love me.
worked. for a while.
And, nah, you know, at moments maybe.
Some
but
classes,
it
some
really,
kids,
yeah,
you know.
some, yeah. And I mean, I was a Midwestern Ohio boy who was in New York City public schools, and you know, didn't even have like things in common with these students. I had just moved to New York for this work, so it took time, you know, to learn and grow and connect. But for me, the debate math, like, it was building the discourse, but it was like giving me a way to start and try something. And so like what's in there is how I started, and how anyone can read it, and please feel free to take those ideas and run with it. But like from that, I've become so comfortable, like I said, changing lesson on the fly, right? Like just
Right.
building off what students are saying. So doing these discourse routines has helped me become more flexible as a teacher. And then, you know, just over the years, like I've just realized how much it goes along with everything else. Like once we have a talking routine down, like a debate math, we can like look at the New York Times, what's going on in these graphs, something I learned about after the book, right? Or we could, you know, which one doesn't belong, which I think there's plenty of those in the books. But like other things that have come up over the years, some good Desmos activities, like things like that, like can all be talked about with debate math. So
Mhm.
I just keep taking it further and further, and even like the projects, which I need to put online at some point. I've been building projects with teachers now, like what's like a full day look like, if students are like exploring a real world thing, and
Cool.
have some kind of like debatable product at the end, like what does that look like? And so just things like that that have grown out of the book, I'd say. There's nothing, I don't know what's in the book anymore, but I know like I've gone in so many directions and built so many more new questions and puzzles, and now I just feel comfortable like playing all the time with lessons and teachers.
I love it. And you know, I'm hearing, like, obviously, I think the repetition, right? Like the experience that you've gained over time and learning and growing and all of these things are going to make you more flexible. So that's probably one of the most important pieces once someone gets started. I guess our last question here before we start to tie a bow on today's episode, to give people a little glimpse into your summit session, I'm wondering, is there something that, you know, comes up, or that like you look back and you go, if I could go back and just like add this one thing, maybe it's a clarification, maybe it's I wish this one move I had
Ooh.
known
You're,
back
you're
then, or
you're getting them to be
recognized.
precise. You're like,
Yeah,
like
I don't
I'm gonna,
know. I don't know. I mean, you can take it anywhere you want, but it's like, I know you and I, John, like there's like times like we've gone back and been like, you know, remember that like presentation we used to do like way back when? We're like, man, we should have been talking about this one thing, you know, and we didn't, and we wish we could have gone back and done that. Like, is there something in that book that if you could just insert that in there, you would go back and do it?
Again, you're asking me to remember what's in the book. I don't know, but I mean, the vague idea. I think the vague idea is still there. I'm guessing if I went to read it now, it might feel, I don't know, a little, I don't know what the word is here, like restrictive, or um like formulaic. Like I was like, here's how to start, here's how I did it. And
right.
that was also for my comfort level in the early stages, right? But
Sure.
I think it's much more open-ended now and goes in so many directions. I think I would add to the book, like I have spent a lot of time going on rabbit holes studying brain science, both biological and psychology, and what makes a good argument and how we
Mm,
really convince people is something I didn't get to get into the book because I was still starting to figure those things out, and I've learned a lot, and I've been doing a lot of work in that realm. So I think I will be talking about this at the summit, of like, really, what does it mean to convince someone? How do we convince them? And why are things like group work tied to that, to being a good
mm,
convincer? And so how all these things we want to do in our classroom are all really interlaced and interdependent on each other.
yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Looking forward
Love it.
to that session, for sure. And you know, we're super excited for you to be part of the summit. It's coming up in November of 2024. It'll be the 6th annual summit. And you know, there's going to be a session on debate math. Chris, any last thoughts you want to leave with the listener on that session, or anything else that you just want them to know about?
Uh, I think I'm just going to leave them with a question.
Ooh, yeah, I love it.
So I will leave listeners with a question, and we'll talk more about this later. Or maybe we should do 2 questions. I know I can't
Ooh,
decide
I
which.
like it. I like
Yeah,
it.
go for it.
Go for it.
Do you want to debate over it?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave listeners to debate, and we'll talk more about this later on. But my first question is: are M&Ms more like Skittles or Hershey's bars?
Ooh.
Answer that however you
Okay.
want.
I like it.
And the second one, is a penguin more like an eagle or a whale?
Kyle's gonna have something to
Those
think
are
about
good
at baseball
ones.
practice tonight.
Yeah, no, it's a baseball game. It's a
Oh.
game. So that they'll be like, why didn't you give him the steal sign? I'm like, I was thinking about penguins. But what can you do?
We'll talk about penguins in my session.
All right.
That is
So-
awesome. Good
awesome.
starters there, Chris. We so appreciate having not only knowing you, learning with you, but also having you as a guest here on the podcast. Also, in the summit, we are excited to welcome you back. For those who are listening, that is Friday, November 15th, Saturday, the 16th, and Sunday, the 17th.
You
comes
got it.
after the
You
16th
figured
in
it out.
November 2024. So head to makemathmoments.com/summit and get yourself signed up for a free ticket to hop into one of the most awesome math learning events of all. And Chris, you are one of the reasons it is so awesome. So thanks so much for joining us here today and getting our wheels, turning here as we approach the summit.
Thanks for having me back, guys. And thanks for welcoming me back to the summit too. I'm excited to share some new debate math stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.